compassionate. Ladies and gentlemen, may the blessings of God be upon you all. I'd like to thank you all for attending this session and thank the panelists and their interventions on a very important issue, and that is Gulf-China relations, cornerstones and challenges. Dr. Aziz bin Sagr will present on cornerstones of Gulf-China relations. Dr. Abdullah Alshayji will present on Gulf states' relations with China and the United States, a tenuous balance. Dr. Abdullah Baabood from the Baabood University in Tokyo will present on the expanding relations between Gulf states and China. We'll give each panelist 20 minutes. Dr. Aziz bin Sagr, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Chair Sheikh Suhaim, and I'm happy to be here in Qatar and Doha, which is always a place to meet friends and colleagues. I personally commend the role the state of Qatar plays in bringing together. I remember in 2002 in the Ritz-Carlton, I had an intervention which led to an important initiative on the relations between NATO and the GCC, which led to the Istanbul initiative. So Doha always brings us together for the benefit of us all. And next year, the summit meeting, also the GCC summit meeting, which will be held in Doha, will be important. I thank the Arab Center, and from our center, the Gulf Center for Research, we started more than 14 years ago an annual meeting at Cambridge University, GRM meeting, and our center and the University of Qatar supported that initiative, and for this important meeting, which is held annually, and very important papers. In total, around 5,000 papers have been produced by that center on various aspects of relations with Europe. Sheikh Suhaim used to honor us with his presence. We agree with the Arab Center on the importance of deep scientific research on the Gulf, and every time it's homegrown and comes from the region itself, it becomes even more beneficiary. Maybe I'm the first Saudi who visited China and had a stamp on his passport, and I don't know, PIA, the Pakistan Airlines. We had to go to Tokyo to Peking, and it was an important and beautiful visit. I remember when I was standing on the wall, I wrote to my late father. I said, I always thought that climbing up a mountain or a staircase is difficult, but because of the China's special altitude, it was not that difficult. I kept that postcard I sent to my late father, and always brings nice memories. And also in 1992, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a Chinese official visited Riyadh, and he told us that they closely followed the events in Moscow with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he said that we must lead the change ourselves, and we must rush into that to avoid the same fate that the Soviet Union has seen, i.e., disintegration of the country. And anyway, uh, coordination in the Gulf countries regarding China. I'm very happy that what Dr. Abdul Aziz al spoke about this on the two summits, the Chinese Arab Summit and the American Arab Summit, and I said to a Chinese member a member of the Chinese delegation. I said to him, I said, you claim you have a balanced position vis-a-vis as Iran, and you do not want to criticize the Houthis, and you cannot support separatists because of the very unique position you find yourselves in with the Uyghur, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, of course, Mongolia. So you cannot support separatists, but at the same time, you have not taken a clear stance vis-a-vis the Houthi missiles, and if you keep your relations as a buyer and seller relationship, then the relationship will not progress, because we can buy and sell with many. Like Dr. Abdul Aziz said, $24 billion was the trade with Europe. Then the same products were produced in China under license, but cheaper. So our trade with Europe became less and less, and with China increased. And also, when it comes to certain positions, China had good initiatives, which did not go beyond the scope of the political position. A commentator once said China and Russia can play the role of the spoiler at the Security Council, but they cannot, or they do not want to play a more active role. And our trade with China reached $100 billion, sorry, and most of it was coming through Kuwait, by the way. Also, about America's involvement in all of this, President Biden, when he visited Jeddah, talked about a vacuum. He said we'll not allow for this vacuum, whether we will not allow for it to be filled by China or Russia. So there was a clear American position. They wanted to avoid that and avoid China and Russia to fill it. King Abdullah and King Salman, they said we look to the east. They did not say we turn towards this. The relationship remained as that of buyers and sellers. We sell 20% of our oil to China, 40% of the imports in the Gulf comes from China. But it's always like that, buying and selling things, not a strategic relationship. But with Iran, there are three important aspects. First, Iran used to feel it's in isolation, and Iran did not feel happy about the Articles 9, 10, 11 of the communique as the result of the summit meeting with China, because the final communique talked about the three islands and Iran's role in the region. But it seems that China learned the lesson before it came to the region. China knew it will be required to come up with clear positions regarding Iran, Syria, and others. Otherwise, there'll be no justification for expanding the economic relations more than what they already at. So Iran called the Chinese ambassador in Tehran, and immediately the Chinese invited Ibrahim Raisi, the Iranian president, to. So in the few months after the Chinese Gulf Summit meeting, they invited the Iranian president, and China is the biggest partner with Iran and the biggest partner with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. So the Chinese role will be accepted if it's to play the role of the guarantor. The problem is Saudi Arabia was looking at regional issues more than bilateral issues. Like, for example, the final communique talked about resuming relations but ignored the other regional issues like energy, sectarianism, supporting terrorism, etc., which is a cause for concern by the GCC countries. The Saudi foreign minister mentioned all of this. So the role of China is good. It's very appreciated. I think now they look forward to how to develop this relationship. The development will happen in one case when the Iranian behavior changes. If the Iranian behavior does not change, the relations will not change, they remain stagnant. Also, cooperation to diffuse the tension in the region and cooperate on Yemen, Sudan, Syria, Iraq. China's positions are different on each country. In some cases, China plays the role of a competitor economically, in others, it plays a political role. I'm not optimistic about solving the Yemen crisis soon because for Iran, this is an issue which can be used by Iran as a bargaining chip at very minimal cost but causes a lot of tension. Whether when the Houthis attack an American warship or fire missiles, this does not come from a vacuum. As for the Sudan, I think when some members of the Congress came to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Lindsey Graham, they said China no go, OPEC Plus no go, Russia no go, using any other currency apart from the dollar is a no-go. But the China no-go was there also. But what was allowed is to expand relations economically, but not politically or security-wise, because America will not allow China to play a security role in the region. And also when it comes to weapons of mass destruction, China has not declared its position. China is now building nuclear reactors for energy purposes. The UAE built one with Korea. Saudi Arabia is still undecided about France or Korea because when you sign the MPT and you have the right to enrichment of 5%, this is a question which has not been sorted out. Also, regarding the war on the Ukraine, and I think China's position regarding the Ukraine was very cautious. Of course, it benefited from the oil prices, China and India, But China did not risk by, for example, providing weapons to Russia and kept the relations within the scope of commercial exchange. China maximized its economic benefits but did not risk doing something at other levels. Also, there is talk about increasing trade relations between the GCC and China. Dr. Abdul Aziz said that we reached a stage whereby we do not want to increase the size of the and China's trade relations with the Arab world is around 350 billion. He said that China has spent $1 trillion on the road and belt. China has changed its approach, and now China in the past loaned money to 65 countries which the road goes through, but now China wants to loan money to the Chinese companies because, for example, Pakistan $70 billion, Ghana and others almost completely now mortgaged to China. So to lower this debt problem made China change its approach to loan money to the companies and not the countries. And also regarding new investments and keeping up with the new developments in investment, China and G5 and G6 provide alternatives for important uh, fintech and others. And there's a lot of joint ventures with China which are proposed. But the question is, will the Gulf states agree to change the dollar to another currency? 7.5 billion trillion is the size of exchange of currencies. Maybe 77% of it is in dollar. So therefore, to get rid of the dollar to other alternative systems or currencies, I think when Dr. Mohammed Misr was in New York at the United Nations, I went to Chase Manhattan to go train on when they sold oil for as a part trade between Nigeria and it was an important example for me. Don't ask me how much, and Dr. Muhammad will not be happy with me if I tell you. Regarding the Road and Belt Initiative, I talked about that, and also protecting the environment and the climate changes, carbon emissions, and the seawater levels rise. When Taiwan was under pressure, Taiwan provides a lot of semiconductors, and there was pressure on Taiwan. China is the biggest refinery. It really endured a lot to reach that position when it comes to these chips. I think over 50 uh, minerals go through the process of producing these semiconductors and the chips. So any country which wants to reach that level will need to spend $1 trillion maybe. And the size of the economic trade, Dr. Abdulaziz gave important figures, but many traders and manufacturers in Gulf see that when China dumps all these products, we are engaged in a conflict with China, and I think in the last meeting there was talk about ceramic Chinese factories with government subsidy managed to produce ceramics which is less when it comes to the quality by the similar compared to the products in Ras Al Khaimah and Saudi Arabia, but much cheaper. In the security field, there is cooperation in combating illicit drug trafficking, combating terrorism. Definitely, there is a lot of cooperation and it has produced important results. But the Gulf and the Organization for Islamic Conference regarding the Uyghur in the Muslim community in China, and the GCC did not want to take a critical stance of China. The interest of the GCC in the Abu Dhabi summit and the Mecca meeting, the first greetings and congratulatory uh, telegrams came from China because the meeting did not say anything critical of China. As for the problem of immigration, and I remember we had the state of Malaga and the Arabian Sea proposed something to do for guaranteeing marine security. China said they did not need that, they have alternatives. They don't want to go through the Malaga Strait because of piracy. The proposal we had was combating piracy, combating terrorism, sharing intelligence on ships, and providing protection. At the military level, there is a lot of development, really. China, despite the fact that they was the first country to sell missiles to Saudi Arabia in the 90s, and they were updated. Now the drones which they sold and missiles have been developed, but the relationship has not been raised to the level of providing strategic partnership in this regard. There is cooperation in some aspects of arms and weapons, but there is no joint training because our military doctrine is more inclined towards the Western countries in that aspect, and also regarding scientific research and also cooperation in this, also artificial intelligence, digitization, and others. These are different aspects. If we look at China as a whole, it's not an alternative to Europe and the US. The relations are still of an economic nature, and China has declared the first position by the 5 permanent members on the ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on the basis of the two-state solution, and the meetings in this regard was amongst the best. But this does not necessarily mean that China has the tools to pressurize Israel. Israel also has relations, economic relations with China at around $20 billion. But generally speaking, China's position was better than others. Is this to fill a vacuum and also to compensate for America's position, which let down the Arabs and Palestinians. I'll leave that to Dr. Abdullah to talk about that. Or is it emanating from real conviction, or they are benefiting from a certain situation? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this valuable paper. We would like now to give the floor to Dr. Abdullah Alshayji. The floor is yours. Good morning to you all. Thank you very much for this 10th edition of this forum. I have attended 7 out of 10 of these fora. I would like to thank the organizers, all those who have contributed to the preparation of this important event. So the important topic of today, which is the emerging role of China. We have to understand this role, how we can strike a balance when it comes to the relationship with China and the other great powers. And we have what is called the security dilemma theory that talks about the stronger and weak allies. So there is a kind of phobia of abandonment, that the stronger ally is going to leave you, or you'll have to keep following that partner. So you do not have any or many options when it comes to the American ally. So we cannot understand a rapprochement in the region without understanding geopolitics at a global level. All American studies, security and intelligence studies that have been developed in the last 10 years when it comes to national defense or national security strategies that are issued every 4 years. We talk about the NIC quadrennial report. So each and every administration that is either that comes to office or that is re-elected issues an NIC. This is a detailed report about the coming 5 years. So all these studies conclude and reach a consensus that the only power that has all the capabilities, all the components in order to confront and challenge the hegemony of the US is China, and that Russia is a headache only. So this was prior to the Ukraine war. And from this standpoint, we cannot, or without understanding that, we cannot understand in this relationship and this position, particularly when it comes to the relationship of the US and this region and the growth of economic relations, investment and commercial relations, and even military relations with the region. And when I talk about the region, I do not talk only about the GCC. Even in the title that was presented, it is not the GCC, it is the Gulf region. And I pose this question to Dr. Abdul Aziz. What does the US look at the agreements that was concluded with China and Iran? We're talking about $400 billion over 25 years for China to support Iran in very critical spheres such as petrochemicals and military and commerce and the infrastructure building, corridors, passageways, and even, I think, a military base, as it was published by the New York Times in March 2021. So the agreement is still not very clear. And of course, we cannot understand our position and relationship with China without understanding what China and Russia aim to achieve. And that was underlined by Mr. Abdulaziz bin Sagr. He said that China did not provide weapons for Russia, despite the fact that Russia requested such weapons. And China tries to establish a multipolar world, and the U.S. warns against any attempts that would run against its own interests. So the U.S. wants to postpone the development of China because the U.S. does not want to be a second player. The IMF and economic studies show that China is the second economic power. It is close to $19 trillion, the US $24 trillion. So we're talking about a huge gap in terms of population as well. But despite all that, China competes with the US in all realms: space, high tech, 5G, and even 6G, that the US looks at as a threat to national security. This is a Chinese technology, and the US does not accept such technology to be used by the American armed forces and the high officials in the US, even Huawei and TikTok, which is Chinese, that is playing a scary role when it comes to reformulation of the American public opinion. This is one of the applications that are mostly downloaded in the world. Minnesota had issued a decision whereby the use of TikTok is unconstitutional. So from this standpoint, we should look at it from a great power rivalry perspective. So we have to understand that. So the US looks at the region, and as I remind my students at university, so I always remind them of the principle of Carter. So why did I talk about these difficult balances of power? Because the US looks at the GCC as its own lake, if we may call it. Carter, in its State of the Union address, after Afghanistan raided and occupied Afghanistan, Carter talked about two main points when it comes to the US strategy towards the GCC. The first point, he announced that the GCC constitutes a point of interest when it comes to the vital interests of the US. So we're talking about the US vital interest. This was the first time that a US president recognizes such thing. So they, at the time, they used to rely on the GCC oil at a much greater level than it is the case now. Also, Carter announced that the US is ready to confront any party that would threaten the interests of the US in this vital region by all necessary means. He could have stopped here, but he continued. And as a result of Spigen Brzezinski, his advisor, or continued the sentence by saying, including military force. So including the use of military force. This is a kind of rhetoric that had been used by the previous President Bush and also by Trump. So that is why in the GCC we feel a certain kind of downgrading of the GCC region and the Gulf region. So the US started its downgrading policy in 2011, when Carter established his strategy, saying that we've had enough of the wars or endless wars in the Middle East, as it was described by Trump, and he said we're not going to continue engaging in military long wars. So the last of which was the Saddam toppling war, and also we have had the Iraqi war, the Afghan war, and they said that we have to look east or start looking east. And Subah al-Ahmed, may God bless his soul, when he was a prime minister, he was the first official who pivoted Tower Asia. So when he held his position, his first visit was to Asia. That was in 2000. Pivots Tower Asia was not successful because the US was still in the region, the Iranian dossier, Iran, Afghanistan, now Gaza, Israel, standing with Israel, and the US is still trapped in this curse, the curse of the the GCC, and after the boycotts that was carried out by King Faisal as a result of the October War in 1973. The US is not going to withdraw from the region, and China knows that, Russia knows that. But what do we want from China? We would like to have another layer of security. So we are their first partner when it comes to commercial relations, and we are part of the Belt Road Initiative, and this is the complexity of China. They have been undermined by the US in the South Sea, South Asian Sea, and China has built two aircraft carriers, so they did not have one. So they had only one that they bought from Ukraine for 15 years or 15 years ago. So China feels the pressure by the US. That is why it tries to move in a certain way in order to, if you go into be inimical to us in our sphere of influence, we are going to do the same. So the visit by Xi Jinping in Riyadh and the holding of three summits. From 2016, China had been planning to expand its relations in the region, and it imports so many goods from Iran, from Iraq, from the GCC. We're the first partner, not with the US, but with China. GCC investments are moving eastward and not westward. And also, we're talking about the strategic relations. So the Pacific, the Atlantic Ocean used to be the center, not the Pacific, sorry, the Atlantic Ocean used to be the center of the world, but it is no longer the case. Now we have the Indo-Pacific, which has become the center. The movement of trade is going to cover both the Pacific and Indian Oceans, and these are geographically closer, and there is interest for the GCC, and China looks at us as states, including Iran, as nations, countries that are good for for economic and particularly for energy security. The US used to import 30% from the region. Now it imports only 5%. So the question, why doesn't the US regress, and why doesn't China move forward? Yes, the US is going to have a lesser footprint. As you can see, when it comes to what is happening now, the US do not have a clear vision. Even Trump, even Biden, they don't have a clear vision vis-a-vis what is happening in the region. So it's only their interests, and the game changer and the change in the position of the GCC countries, including the US, including Saudi Arabia, was the security problem that happened in 2019. We have had the targeting of Aramco in Saudi Arabia. So the Houthis claim that they were behind it, but even CIA and the Saudis know that it was Iran. The targeting was very surgical. It made 50% of daily production inoperative. It made it dysfunctional. So, and this showed that we are completely uncovered. We're talking about 17 drones, and this has led to a problem when it comes to world economy. So we have the economy has come to a halt, and when Trump stated and he said this has happened in Saudi Arabia, not the US. What can I do? And he refused to condemn Iran, and he sent Patriot missiles and a number of soldiers, and that was it. So this was a shocking move. It was an eye-opening move, and they started looking for alternatives. China does not have any soldiers in the regions. They don't have a base in Djibouti. And Sri Lanka is in a debt trap. And they are drowning Pakistan in order to get a base on the Arab Sea. So China does not want to be a security guarantor in the region, but it wants to enter into a number of points of hegemony from a military perspective. And the US has been observing, and they have realized and discovered that China is building a base in Abu Dhabi that can be used for military purposes. And after that, they realized that China and Saudi Arabia are building a factory in a mountainous areas, and they have asked Saudi Arabia to stop with the work that is being carried out. China sent or sold ballistic missiles to Saudi Arabia. So China wants to keep the passageways, wants to have its own hegemony, but it is the US that is controlling those kind of spheres. So they have in excess of 20 bases, and we're talking about 40,000 soldiers, Marines, and so on, including, of course, Turkey, and this is all managed through the US CENTCOM. So all operations, all military operations, including the war in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Iraq, all the operations that have led to the killing of commanders in Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and also the base in the Arabian Peninsula. All these military operations that are being carried out in the region are all carried out from the US CENTCOM in the Aidid base, and the 5th Fleet is in Bahrain, and also we have the Kuwait has the largest number of soldiers, more than 13,000, and the Kuwait was one of the countries that were against having those soldiers during the Cold War. And also we have other soldiers in different countries, including the Emir Sultan bin Abdul Aziz base. And also we have 2,000 to 3,000 in the Dhafra base in the Emirates and also in Oman. In addition, there are other bases in other regions. So 3 countries have close ties. So we're talking about $106 billion. So the Arab world, the commercial exchange is 400 billions, but the first partner is China. So our oil is going east and not west. The United Arab Emirates, the commercial exchange reached 100 billion, Iraq 50 billion. So with the rest of the world, we're talking about 60 to 70% from the GCC, and also the other Arab countries come in the second position. The second important development is that the US used to import $1.7 billion in 2012, and now when it's talking about barrels of oil, but now the number of barrels has declined. Many say, why do not Arabs use their oil weapon against the US due to their blatant support? No, the situation is no longer the case as it used to be in the 70s when Kissinger was threatening and so on. And the other problem is that we have security relations and there is no alternative. With all the criticism and the downgrading and the policy of apathy and so on. But China does not have a decision there and does not have a blue water navy. So they are building their own power in this respect. So what is being built? So the response of the US was very strict. They want to stop China from having a defense or a geostrategic presence. So China and Biden, during a summit, they talked about Build Back a Better World, which is the counter initiative to the BRI, sorry. But this is still embryonic. They're talking about an alternative because they want them to move away from China. Also, there was another meeting that was held in China, in India, G20. There was the IMEC, India Middle East corridor, Europe corridor, which is another counter initiative to what China wanted to develop. So China knows that so this is the initiative. These are the initiatives that have been developed by these two powers. Yes, the US relies less and less when it comes to oil, but they want to keep the passageways, and they do not want Iran or China to have a role. But when it comes to Russia, before it was really busy with the situation in Ukraine, the situation was not as developed. So they are benefiting from the situation that is happening now, the war on Gaza. All interest and what is happening is all concentrating on what is all eyes are concentrating on what is happening in Gaza. There was a great bombardment in Kiev just recently. Yes, we are with Russia in OPEC plus, and there was a great deal of criticism to GCC countries. If you look at the literature, and I have written many, many articles, the US had accused the GCC countries that they have an alliance with Russia in its war against Ukraine, because the GCC countries refused to increase the production of oil until the prices go down, because they do not want the Democrats to lose the majority in the Senate and also in Congress in general. So when Biden wanted to persuade the Saudis, so try to limit your relationship with Russia, increase your production of oil, because we would like the Democrats to keep the majority in Congress. If we look at Bob Menendez, who is now accused of embezzlement and corruption and so on, he called and said that we should stop the deals with Saudi Arabia because it deals with Russia, which is against our interests. So we are trying to strike very difficult balances. We would like to have China as a partner. We would like to have BRI. We would like to have great investments with China. We would like to have the Belt and Silk Road. Would like to keep certain risks with Russia. We do not want to heavily criticize Russia, and we voted for the condemnation of the war on Ukraine by Russia, and we've done so many things in order to strike a balance. We keep a good relationship when it comes to OPEC plus, and in order to preserve the prices of oil, and Saudi Arabia said that it is going to continue declining the prices of oil, and this is something that is not welcome by Saudi Arabia. So what do we want from China, Russia? These are very difficult balances that we aim to achieve. Yes, I do think that this is going to be also a good opportunity after all these years. After this reconciliation, we have to try to start relying more and more on ourselves, because China is not a viable alternative for any security arrangement in the region. We cannot rely on China after the agreement was concluded. So we're talking about a strategic relationship between Iran and China, and Iran thinks that it is China that helps them break their isolation, and the US is really surprised, particularly when Xi Jinping talked about non-interference. So how was China able to come up with arrangements that were shocking to the US during the mediation that was announced by China between Iran and Saudi Arabia? Nobody knew then that there was a mediation taking place between both Iran and Saudi Arabia. So the Cold War still continues between the US and China. And even the meeting in San Francisco on the 15th of November, so it was a kind of a PR campaign more than any strategic or important kind of deal about investment or the role of China in Taiwan. There was a great deal of criticism. They talked about the bullying that was carried out by China against the allies of the US in Australia, Thailand, the Philippines, and so on, and that the United States of America is establishing military bases in order to put China under siege in its own spheres of influence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we move to Dr. Abdullah Baabood. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Sheikh Suhaim, and thank you to the Arab Center for this kind invitation to speak before this esteemed forum. And I'm pleased to be with this distinguished group of panelists. And we have heard this morning in the previous session about the importance of the relations between China and the Gulf region, and now we listen to more details from this panel on this relations and its different aspects. First of all, let me say Assalamu alaikum and good morning or good afternoon. To talk about this relations, we heard a lot about it, and this relations between China and the Gulf region is not new. In fact, it's deeply rooted in history. There have been previous old relation trades, but many things have happened as a result of international changes and the emergence of Western powers, which hindered the trade between the Middle East and the Far East, and the trade moved more towards the West. This is a long historical thing we do not have time to delve into. But what we noticed lately is a new form of distinguished relations. We had the figures that our previous colleagues have talked about, and China, in a short period of time, managed to bypass the size of trade between the GCC, trade with America and the AU put together in a short period of time, despite all the hopes that this relations, especially the trade and economic relations between the GCC and the US and the EU will grow furthermore. We see a different picture now, especially when it comes to the economic aspect of things and investments. Now China is a main player in the investments in the Gulf. We'll talk about this later with more details. And we notice that China does not think it enough only to be an active trade, economic, and investment partner. China, in addition to all of that, is developing its relations to go even further than that. For example, it was mentioned how China nurtured the the agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and we saw that the ministerial committee formed by the Arab League visited China as the first country, and we saw that China has positions which matter to the Arab world. So politically, whether we like it or not, China has become a player in the region too, and China has become a main player in developing the industry in the Gulf, which has always looked at the West as a strategic partner for many reasons. But the West did not achieve for these countries what they wanted, so they are moving towards China to partner with China, first to buy some weapons which were difficult to gain in the past, and to develop military industries. We heard about different projects in Gulf countries, whether drones or other things. And also for the naturalization of these industries. So, for these reasons and others, China has not become a trade and economic partner only, but it's becoming maybe a political strategic partner. Why all of this is happening? Why is China playing this role, and why has this change occurred? We know that nothing stays or remains the same, and this applies to everything, even to politics. And we know in politics there is no permanent friends or permanent foes. There is permanent interest only, and there are major changes taking place now as we speak, or has happened in the recent past. This is part and parcel of life itself and international politics. There are changes at the level of energy, international relations, and at the level of energy, for example, when energy was moving from the Gulf countries to the west, has turned to the east, and this is because of the discovery of alternative means like shale gas and others, and the reliance on Russia as a source for energy supplies. And the Gulf countries felt it necessary to find markets for their products, and this was available in Asia. Asia was like Japan and Korea and others, and then came China. Now China is ahead of them all. They all China is the second largest economy in the world now, so far as the size of its market is concerned, or the rate of development and growth. And this has made China in need of energy to continue this economic development. So there was a demand, and the Gulf countries had the supply because they lost their markets in the West, so they had to find alternative markets in the East, and this is what has happened. And we see China today is the biggest importer of energy from this region. To the extent that some countries in the region now have their economies almost totally relying on China. A large percentage of the economies in this region export to China, and we must not forget that these countries are still rentier economies. They rely firstly and foremost on the carbohydrates, the oil and gas. If we understand that, and the biggest portion of this production goes to China, we understand the importance of China, not for the economy of these countries, but for the security too, because today uh, uh, security and the economy are two sides of the same coin. And we must not forget that the center of gravity, economically speaking, which was in the Atlantic Ocean, and if we go by the figures of economic production, moved from the Atlantic to Asia and going in the direction of China. So therefore these indicators point towards China. And the economy points towards Asia and China, and through this we understand that the Gulf countries are in need of to sell their oil to deal with China as a developed economic power at all levels and provides China with many of its needs. So, in addition to the economic changes and changes at the level of the energy, there are political changes too. Today, Asia and the Indo-Pacific has become an area where a lot of attention is paid to in the world. The United States is talking about the pivot to Asia. So it's not just the United States on its own which is making this turn, but the Middle Eastern countries, the Gulf countries are doing the same because their economic interests are tied to Asia. So therefore, this turn is not specific to the major powers or the United States, but as the colleagues have said, there are tensions between China and the US over Taiwan and the South China Sea, but the Middle Eastern countries, from an economic point of view, have turned economically and politically, and this was evident in China's patronage of the agreement and also in the case of Palestine when the Arab countries approached China on the issue of the war on Gaza. All of this show that shows that China has become a major player, and we must not forget that the world politically cannot accept a unipolar system. After the demise of the Soviet Union, we went through that, and the United States became the dominant power, but it's only natural that other poles try to enter the fray and compete with the US, and we see China as one of these poles and becoming even more powerful than Russia. So therefore, the world cannot remain as a unipolar system, and a multipolar system is more natural and accepted more. And also, China has its attraction in the region. Apart from what it was said, China has no colonial legacy in the region. China does not condescend, well, with all due respect to our relations with the West, but the West tends to look down at the region in a way. China comes with a different paradigm, different model than the West. The West is trying to impose its values, and they pressurize us to accept and validate their values and links that to the trade when it comes to human rights, equality. So I'm not judging the values, but I'm trying to say that the West comes with this baggage of colonial legacy and deals with us with the mentality of the colonialist power, and they bring their own values and try to impose them in at a time when our societies find themselves in a different position than judging or accepting these values. China doesn't do that. China doesn't impose its values. China prefers to deal in purely economic terms. And of course, there are things that we disagree with China on, or China disagrees with us on, but both parties try to avoid these bones of contention. Also, China does not interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. This is a very big issue and it's very compatible to the outlook of Gulf countries. Somebody said that China will not be the global power that will protect the region. This is true, but at the same time, it's also true that China is not in a rush. China goes with a deliberate pace. It has long term strategies which can run for hundreds of years. China is not today the power that can really face up to the United States. China is not yet a global power because, for example, it does not have aircraft carriers and does not have military bases. I think China has two or three aircraft carriers, and this is not enough to be a global power. China knows that and understands that, and China is gradually building its force, and they have a very long-winded vision to the world. They do not have the desire to interfere militarily in any region. Some people expect that from China. Some people think that when the United States goes, China will replace it to protect the region. I don't think this will happen. Also, China has a policy of supporting these countries, and we must not forget that in this region we face formidable challenges, whether economic, social. We have youth unemployment, we have diversification in the economy, where there's a movement towards a knowledge-based economy or to move away from rentier economies. We have not got all what we wanted from the West, so China is presenting itself as a provider of a large portion of what we desire. So the Gulf countries see in China as one of the main players in the world which can benefit us in this regard. For this reason, we understand and appreciate why the GCC, the Gulf countries, are really interested in this relations with China. China does not act on its own. China is a country that respects international law and works through the international systems and in a smart way. They do not want to get involved in any project which will place it on a confrontation course with the West or the United States. They cleverly work within the existing frameworks, even if they're not convinced that these are the right frameworks, but as a matter of necessity, they work through them. They do not want to change the world as such. If you want to change, you must get involved in it and gain the respect of others. So China deals in this manner, and we see the Gulf countries economically are more dependent on China, and they're diversifying their ties, their ways of dealing with China to joint ventures, to investments in the Gulf and elsewhere, and the Gulf countries are investing in the Chinese market and investing with China in other countries. So therefore, the partnership is more real now than before, and in very short decades, all the neglect by the European Union and the United States and all the dialogues which were held with the European Union, the US, trade zones, and others, not much of that has materialized, not at the level of the Gulf, but the Middle East. The Middle East in general suffers from the neglect by Europe and the West. For this reason, these countries found what they want in China and in Asia in general. So this neglect by the West plays a major role. And there is another detail we have to be aware of, and that is the desire by the Gulf countries for China to contribute and participate not at the level of trade, economy, and others, but they are also interested in the Shanghai Group, which is an organization led by Russia and China, and it works against or at least competes with the West. And we see the Gulf countries now are invited and interested in the BRICS. This is a major group or bloc, and economically it can compete with the G7 countries. So, therefore, all of this shows that what the Gulf countries are doing is not based on their love for China or hatred of the West, but ultimately they're trying to achieve their security and to further their economic interests, their political and other economic and security matters. For small countries like the Gulf countries, by their nature, try to diversify and to their relations because they don't like to remain or stay under the hegemony of one pole. They always try to have multiple choices, and they are more suited to a multipolar system in the world because this allows them more margin to maneuver. This is known in international theories that small and medium-sized countries find a bigger margin for maneuvering when the world is a multipolar world because they can use that. They play one country against another rather than have one big country playing them against each other. So sometimes they find themselves more inclined to have interest with America or the West, and on other times with China. This is a well-known fact, and uh, for the lack of time, Sheikh Sahim sent me his note. I will try and conclude by maybe I did not add many new things, but a lot has been said in the previous session and this session. But in summary, these are not just relations between the Gulf countries and China. These are major changes which are taking place at the level of the world economy, the climate changes, which we did not say much about, the energy markets, and other changes in the field of energy. Also, the economic weight shifting towards Asia with the political and other considerations. All of this makes Gulf countries strive to achieve their interests with the emergence of new younger generation of leaders, and they try to create new visions to diversify their economies. They find alternatives, permanent economy, not relying on oil and gas. And if Sheikh Suhaim allows me, in the end, the Gulf countries can achieve their interests with the East, with the West, with the North, and the South, with the global South, I mean, which is emerging strongly. But the important thing that they should think about is their first and foremost interest is to coordinate and cooperate and work together between them, whether through the GCC or the Arab League, to achieve the kind of Gulf integration or Arab integration or the integration between the countries in the region, and not to rely on East or West, North or South. This can strengthen their hand in any negotiations with the others. And there is another point I forgot to mention. The West talks about values. When the West talks about values, at this particular day and age, I feel hugely disappointed and what, especially in view of the West stance against what is happening in Gaza. They see these women and children bombed into smithereens, and they don't even move to call for a ceasefire. So this is a huge crisis the area is going through. So we really need to change many things, including our view of our relations with the West, and to what extent will the West continue by trying to impose on us their what they call universal values as the values that should be imposed on us? I think the West should revisit its stands, and they're losing a lot, and the cost will be a lot indeed in the future if they don't understand. This is what is really happening. Thank you.
With Iran. So all politicians in all their papers. So I am not a politician. I work in the economic sphere, but I have to strike a balance. So is it only a matter of Iran? Or is it China, as Dr. Aziz said? It is a country that we've been working with for 30 years. Yes, we did not see all the opportunities available, and we've started seeing the opportunities that are on the table, and we would like to benefit from those opportunities. And I would like to say that China cannot meet all the needs that the GCC countries get from the West in general and from the US. So can China cover all the needs of the region? No. China has a number of issues such as inflation, problems with technologies in research and development, R&D. So these are points of weakness when it comes to the Chinese partner. And I have another question to Dr. Abdullah Alshayji. Do you want to say that China carried out a rapprochement with the GCC countries after the US accepted that? So you said that the US accepted such rapprochement approved of it? Do you think that China knocked the door and played a role in this rapprochement that is happening? Or is it an independent kind of will? China saw an opportunity in the region. That is why it went forward and it concerted its relations with the GCC countries. Yes, the US competes now with the GCC when it comes to oil, and it has reduced its imports from the GCC. Dr. Abdullah Baabood, my question is to you now. Dr. Abdullah Baabood, what you said is very interesting. Let me agree with you first, then I'll disagree with you. I agree with you when you said that the GCC countries should complement each other, should concert efforts, should have deep studies when it comes to our relationship with China or any other country. This should be based on a strategic partnership with China and other countries. The US was able to achieve so many of its interests when it comes to concluding agreements with individual states in the GCC. So yes, we should have economic complementarity and integration in our relationship with China or any other country. I agree with you, but what I disagree with you on is that China, when you said does not have an ideology and does not want to influence the region through its culture. No, China has an agenda. It wants to control through its culture and the Belt and Silk Road. This is a very, very costly initiative. This is a road, a passageway of trade. It wants to control all markets, passageways, seas in order to promote its profuse products in China. And this is what I do not agree with you upon. So if you can introduce yourself, please. Can you introduce yourself first, please? Dr. Habibullah Turkistani. The second question here. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. Majid Turki from the Russian Studies Center. 3 quick points. Dr. Abdul Aziz, you talked about pillars, but you did not mention any of those pillars. If you can shine more light on those pillars for us to be able to analyze them and discuss them. Dr. Abdullah Alshayji, you talked about the difficult balance that we try to strike, but talked negatively about the impact, which is in disparity with in contradiction with the facts on the ground, whether these are direct facts or non-direct, which makes it much more positive. I think we need to have a kind of a small session of polemic, if you allow me, outside the hall. So you said that China does not have a kind of a colonial legacy or heritage. No, perhaps, yes, superficially, yes, but it is very, very concerning, scary when it comes to Asia, to Africa, because I have prepared a number of points. Perhaps during the lunch break I can discuss this matter. And when it comes to the militarization of thinking, the militarization of relations, I think that we need to think about the economic angle, the economic interest, which is the pathway that leads the world, particularly that the US has a strong economic problem, particularly when it comes to public death. Thank you very much. Go ahead, doctor. Thank you very much. So 3 important presentations, GCC presentations. What is missing when it comes to this session and the session prior to this one is India, Israel, and their threats on the GCC in light of the cooperation that we see between India, the Emirates, the US, and Israel. There is cooperation between these 4 countries. Also, Iran is part and parcel of this kind of cooperation taking place in the region from a political and economic perspectives. May the peace of God be upon you all. I would like to thank you for the great papers that have been presented. I am talking to you. I'm from the Ahwaz. Muhammad Yunus from the Ahwaz. There is a piece of information when it comes to the Chinese-Israeli relations. Israel can build close relations with China. We're talking about in excess of $200 billion. But the GCC and GCC countries, we cannot build such relations because we take into account our interests with the US. This is the first point. The second point, why allow or rely in actual fact on securizing security from the part of the West and particularly the US. As an Arab citizen, you cannot achieve self-sufficiency if you do not have cooperation amongst GCC countries. When we look at the region and the situation in the region, this is a very difficult situation. We have seen the West and their position vis-à-vis the situation in Gaza. So it is unfortunate. When are we going to wake up? When are we going to build our self-sufficiency and create and establish a clear strategy when it comes to the Palestinian cause? Because it is a cause that impacts all the region. Thank you very much. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. Dr. Fahad Al-Marri, Professor of Political Science from Georgetown University. I would like to thank you very much. These are very distinctive efforts, and I would like to thank the Arabi Center. So very frankly, so the problematic from my view, we, the GCC countries, we do not know what we want. Our problem is that we have some wishes that we would like to achieve, but we do not have a will. The countries, the nations have a will, and some governments have certain desires, but we should not wait for the others to decide what desires we want to achieve. And we are still within the framework of the GCC, where there's no complementarity, there's no clear will amongst the countries of the GCC as a council. There have been a number of sessions that have been convened with the Atlantic Council. We coordinated with each other to see what challenges would arise in our rapprochement with China. But the rapprochement between the GCC and China is more of a commercial rapprochement than a security one. We are a region that needs stability. It lacks stability. There are challenges, there are threats, but this can only be overcome if we cooperate with each other, if we integrate our communities and countries. So we have the US, we have a cultural rapprochement, political rapprochement, security one. We cooperate with them when it comes to joint trainings and maneuvers and so many other kinds and levels of training. The problem does not lie outside, it lies inside our council. We do burn in ourselves by ourselves. We come up with so many issues. We have to look into this matter, the matter of integrating efforts. So we have come to the end of this session, the official time, but we're going to continue with the discussion, particularly those who have posed a number of questions. So now I would like to give each and every speaker 4 minutes in order to respond to what they see adequate. So we started from the right-hand side, and now I would like to start from the left-hand side with Dr. Baabood. Thank you very much, Sheikh Suhaim. So I'm going to be very brief due to the fact that the time is limited. I would like to start with the last point, Dr. Fahad. So we have to take into account that the GCC countries in their relationship with China, so even in simple talks or agreements, these relationships are different amongst the countries in the GCC. 3 of the GCC countries have very distinctive strategic relations, and the 3 others do not have relations that are as strategic as the other ones. So we do not have a unified, uniform kind of strategy when it comes to the relationship between the GCC and China. Yes, we have the free trade agreements between the GCC countries and China, but there are a number of impediments, including the petrochemicals and so on and so forth. I agree that we need deeper, stronger GCC relations amongst themselves as countries in their relations with others. So China is not going to be the magic wand of the power that is going to solve all our problems. There is no such thing as a power that would come to solve all your problems. Each region has its own challenges, has its own problems, and akin to any other region, we face challenges. So it is incumbent on us to work together and to develop our regional and foreign relations. The region needs to rethink about how it would work together as a council. So we'd like to take this opportunity to take that perhaps it is time for us to reformulate the statute of the GCC Council. Otherwise, this is going to be to no avail, similar to the League of Arab States. So we find that there are GCC countries that conclude agreements outside the realm of the GCC. We know that there is a number of agreements, customs agreements, and so on. That is why we need to revisit our position vis-à-vis China, vis-à-vis the US, or any country. So China is not going to take the place of the US. No, China is similar to any other commercial or trade partner. Yes, a partner with whom we disagree on certain things, but it achieves so many things, or it caters for so many things that the region wants to achieve. So how can we augments the level of interest of cooperation? We need to have a kind of a common kind of system instead of having bilateral relations, each and every country dealing with China individually. I would like to thank you very much. I would like to give the floor now to Dr. Abdullah Alshayji. Thank you very much, Sheikh Suhaim. I would like to thank you for your questions, but very quickly. I did not understand the question that was posed by Dr. Torsani. So, was that your question when you said, did China ask permission from the US before having relations with countries in the GCC? Who took permission from the other? No, there's no permission taken here. No. We cannot hear what the person is saying, unfortunately. You're saying if the GCC countries have taken permission from the US? No, what I said, that's the situation, what has happened in 2019, and before that there was rapprochement, but it has not reached a point where we have seen a certain level of cooperation similar to what we have. And in actual fact, there are no other alternative options. But if we look at the 2004, when we entered with the Istanbul Initiative for Cooperation, what was the objective? So whenever you go into any kind of alliance, Iran looks at the matter with a lot of caution. So we are not militarizing these relations. Yes, when you have a number of security alliances such as the so many agreements that have been concluded, this is not going to be the magic wand. Yes, also the invasion of Kuwait has proven that we do not have any deterrence force. Without resorting to weapons, you should have the power to deter without even resorting to any war. So if the US stops supporting or downgrades its relationship with the GCC, what is going to be the alternative? And this is a question that is being posed since the establishment of the GCC Council. We always say, why don't we start with ourselves? The GCC crisis was a big blow to us. So what have we achieved when it comes to cooperation, coordination, when it comes to early warning, the missile defense and early warning and so on and so forth? If the US is not here, shall we tell ourselves, let's go and check with China or check with Russia? No, no. No, they do not have the power that would lead to finding solutions. And as I told you, the security problematic. So a strong ally will not take into account the importance of your own security and carry out calculations as to how this is going to be manifested on the ground. When Trump assassinated Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad the airport, did he coordinate with GCC leaders? What if Iran responds and tries to target, I don't know, American gatherings in Kuwait or Qatar or Abu Dhabi? So we follow the US, but when the US started downgrading the relations and when the nuclear deal was signed and concluded, we felt that we were let down. We were the last people to know. So when Obama came to the last GCC summit, he said that we come to bring to your attention. And all credit to Obama that the Camp David agreement was agreed, what concluded between the GCC and the US in Camp David. So it was in Riyadh, and since 2017 we did not have any US GCC summit since then. I have one last point, if you allow me. Dr. Turki, you talked about the negative American impacts. I don't understand what you meant by that. This is the reality. So yes, the U.S. is downgrading its relations. Even Biden himself and also a number of intelligence unclassified studies. Biden says that the priority is Indo-Pacific region, not the GCC, not the Middle East. So those regions pull the United States, and the U.S. was forced to increase the number of their powers. So this is testament to the fact that this is a downgrading process, because there is no aircraft carrier in the region and they had to bring the Eisenhower carrier. So one last point. Brother Muhammad asked me and talked about the trade, the exchange between China and Israel. He talked about 1.3 billion exported by China to Israel. So we're talking about $500 million in favor of China. But Israel is not happy with the position of China vis-a-vis what is happening in Gaza. So the first 2 days, they did not comment, and after that, Israel was unhappy because China did not condemn and say that these are terrorist acts. Thank you very much. We'd like to move now to Dr. Aziz bin Sagr. The floor is yours. I would like to underline 2 points. 10 years ago, there was an exercise that we carried out with the World Economic Forum with regard to the Chinese agenda from a national security perspective. And there have been a number of points which are protectionism, level of growth, and rate of exchange, and the Pacific security. All these 4 points are linked to the United States of America. So the most important deposits are part of the U.S. bond. So the Israeli-Chinese relation, we're talking about $17.5 billion. And I have a diagram that shows the level of trade between the two countries. Dr. Habib. So when you talked about Iran, we cannot hear what the person is saying, unfortunately. He is not using the microphone. So the objective is to underline that, for instance, war by proxy is in Yemen, despite the fact that it supports the legitimacy on the ground and despite the fact that it has a good position in general, but it did not object. We have been targeted by in excess of 500 ballistic missiles and Katyusha. And China not even once had an official statement whereby it condemned such kind of acts, because it knows that this is a war by proxy and that the Houthis are supported by the Iranians. So when you talk about this particular point, so we would like to see, is this your political position? Are you still supporting Iran despite the fact I'm being targeted through a war by proxy in the popular mobilization in Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon? So these were the points that were mentioned in this regard. So can we cover our needs? I said that most of the things that we buy from China, I used to buy them from Europe. So there is nothing new. So there is nothing as such as a unique products. Yes, the price is better and facilitating imports. During the coronavirus pandemic, there was a logistical problem. So the price of the container reached $8,000, and prior to the pandemic, it was $1,500. So this is another logistical problem. So are my purchases from China, can it be replaced by somebody else? Yes, it can be replaced by somebody else. What had been mentioned by Dr. Majid, I talked about the security, the economic, the cultural. So these are the pillars that I wanted to concentrate on when it comes to our relationship with China. We agree on certain matters and disagree on certain other matters. On the 23rd of November, when we have the Munich Security conference, I asked the Secretary of State in the Ukraine war. We voted in the Security Council. We issued statement in the GCC. We always talk about the territorial integrity of countries. So we contributed to the release of so many prisoners. So you want to be with you in the camp where the US is with other countries against Russia. Why should be we at such? He said no balance. We told him that we would like to keep a balanced relationship. He said no balance with aggression. No balance with aggression. This was the expression that he made. And this is recorded. This shows the contradiction and also the double standardness. So the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia 2 days after visited Ukraine, and we have seen $400 million that have been presented in support for Ukraine. I would like to thank you very much. I would like to thank you for your time. We're happy to be with you. Thank you. Thank you very much. At the end, I would like to thank all the speakers, all the guests for being with us. I would like to thank you for your valuable papers. May the peace of God be upon you all.